I wasn't supposed to be home that night. My flight from Denver had been moved up a day early because the last meeting wrapped ahead of schedule. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the front of the house. I cut the engine and sat there for a second, savoring the thought of surprising my wife, Melissa. We hadn't seen each other in a week. I wanted to see her smile when she realized I was home early. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I slipped my bag from the back seat, unlocked the front door quietly, and stepped inside. The house was dark, but there was a faint glow from upstairs, spilling onto the landing. I moved up the staircase, my hand gliding over the railing, my steps soundless out of habit. Halfway up, I caught voices, low, muffled. A man's voice. My pulse slowed, my grip tightening on the railing. I stopped at the top step, the bedroom door barely cracked. Through that gap, I could see just enough. Melissa's bare shoulder, the tousled sheets, and a man lying beside her. His face was turned toward her, his hand resting casually on her hip. She laughed, soft, quiet. The same laugh she'd used with me for years. My jaw clenched. Every muscle in my body was screaming to kick that door wide open, to drag him out and make her see exactly what she'd done. But I didn't move. I stood there, silent, watching for another 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then I turned, walked back down the stairs, and out the front door without a sound. The night air hit me like a slap, clearing my head. My hands were steady now, almost unnaturally so. I got into the car, drove 2 blocks, and parked under a street lamp. I sat there in the stillness, breathing in and out, replaying what I'd just seen until it burned itself into something sharper than pain. Clarity. The man's voice, his face. I knew enough from Melissa's work stories to match him. Ryan, the so-called work friend she'd been spending late nights with, the one who just needed help on a presentation. I pulled out my phone and opened social media. It didn't take long to find him. His feed was public, full of photos from golf courses, happy hours, and corporate dinners. And then there she was, his wife, Claire. Early 30s, athletic, bright smile. A different kind of beauty from Melissa's, but it was there in every shot. I scrolled through their pictures, vacation selfies, anniversary posts, but the longer I looked, the more I noticed it. She wasn't leaning into him in any of them. Her smile was wide, but her eyes didn't match. I clicked on message before I could think twice. My first text was short. We've never met, but we need to talk. I attached 3 photos I'd taken through the cracked doorway, nothing obscene, but enough to make the truth undeniable. Her reply came less than a minute later. When and where? I could almost hear the steel in her voice through the words. I stared at her reply, the phone glowing in my hand, the street lamp above casting a yellow ring across the dashboard. There was no hesitation in her message, no request for proof beyond what I'd already sent. She knew. Maybe she'd suspected for a while. Maybe my photos just confirmed something she'd been trying not to face. I typed back, tomorrow, noon, anywhere you choose. Less than 30 seconds later, Riverside Cafe, back patio. I put the phone down and sat there for a while, watching the occasional car pass, letting the quiet wrap around me. There was no point going back home that night. I booked a room at a small business hotel near the freeway, checked in with nothing but my overnight bag, and lay there staring at the ceiling until the faint blue light of morning leaked through the curtains. By noon the next day, I was walking toward the cafe. It was one of those places with a garden of mismatched tables and hanging flower baskets that swayed in the light breeze. Claire was already there, sitting at a corner table in the sun. She looked different from her photos, sharper, more alive. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but the rest of her face was unreadable. She wore a light summer dress, her posture perfectly upright, a half-empty iced coffee sweating on the table in front of her. I sat down opposite her, placing my phone face down on the wood between us. You're early, I said. I don't like wasting time, she replied, sliding her sunglasses up onto her head. Her eyes were green, steady, and locked on mine. Tell me everything you saw. I did. No embellishments, no theatrics, just the truth of what I'd walked in on. The man in her bed, his hand on her hip, the The way Melissa laughed. I watched the muscles in Claire's jaw work as I spoke. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, didn't cry. When I finished, she leaned back and let out a slow breath. I knew, she said quietly. Not the details, but I knew something was wrong. He's been different for months. For a moment, we just sat there, the hum of conversation from other tables filling the space between us. Then she leaned forward, her voice lower. So what do you want to do about it? I met her gaze. That depends on you. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I have an idea. The next half hour was spent planning. Not in a vindictive, screaming way, in a calm, calculated one. She mentioned a small lakeside hotel 2 hours out of town. A place she knew from weekend getaways with friends. No crowds, no prying eyes except the occasional tourist with a camera. We'll make sure the right people see us, she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I knew exactly what she meant. By the time we stood to leave, we had every detail in place. Check-in Friday afternoon. 2 nights. Public enough to be seen, private enough to enjoy. As we walked toward the parking lot, she glanced over her shoulder at me. Bring whatever you need for the weekend, she said, and make sure you don't look like you're hiding. The rest of the week moved in a blur. At home, Melissa barely noticed me. She was working late, again on Thursday, coming home with that faint perfume that wasn't hers. I didn't confront her. I didn't even change my routine. Inside, though, I was already gone. Friday afternoon, I packed a small bag, telling Melissa I had a last-minute work project out of town. She barely looked up from her phone. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway of the hotel, Claire was already there, leaning against her car in a white sundress that made her tan glow. She smiled as I walked up, the kind of smile that said this wasn't going to be a polite coffee meeting. We checked in together, the older man at the front desk glancing between us with a knowing grin. Our room overlooked the lake, the late afternoon sun glittering across the water. I dropped my bag, and Claire stepped out onto the balcony, leaning against the railing, her hair catching the light. This, she said, looking out at the water, is going to be a very interesting weekend. The room smelled faintly of cedar from the wooden beams and the fresh flowers in a vase by the window. Claire stood on the balcony for a long moment, her hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes fixed on the shifting light over the lake. I joined her, leaning on the opposite side, feeling the breeze carry the scent of pine and water. She didn't turn toward me at first, just said, I want us to be seen, but not in a way that looks staged. It needs to feel natural. Natural was easy. We left the room not long after, walking along the gravel path that wound down toward the dock. A few couples were sitting on benches, others strolling hand in hand. Claire slipped her arm through mine, her touch casual but deliberate. People noticed. They always do when a woman like her is in a dress that moves with the wind, smiling at the man beside her as if he's the only person on the planet. We stopped at a lakeside cafe with a deck that overlooked the water. She ordered a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses, and leaned in across the table as we talked. I could feel the eyes of the waiter linger a little too long, the subtle glances from the other tables. Claire laughed easily, resting her hand on mine as she made some dry remark about the hotel's rustic charm. Every move felt like part of an unspoken choreography, one that didn't need rehearsal. By the time the sun began to drop toward the far shore, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink, we were back on the dock. Claire kicked off her sandals and dangled her feet over the edge, sipping the last of her wine. A young couple walked past us, the girl pulling out her phone to take a picture of the view. You two look perfect in this light, she said with a grin. Before I could answer, she snapped a candid shot. Claire leaning her head against my shoulder, my arm draped loosely around her back. Accidental souvenirs, Claire murmured as the couple walked away. That night, we stayed out late, moving from the dock to a small bar just off the main street of the little lakeside town. The place was dim but lively, with an open mic singer working through a set of blues covers. Claire drew looks the moment we walked in, and she didn't waste them. She sat close, touched my arm when she laughed, leaned in so our faces nearly brushed when she spoke. It wasn't forced, we were both too aware of the undercurrent between us for it to feel like an act. We left the bar around midnight, the streets quiet except for the hum of a few neon signs. Back in the room, the lake shimmered under the moonlight. I stepped out onto the balcony, and Claire joined me a moment later, her hair loose now, tumbling over her shoulders. She rested her head against my chest, silent except for the steady rhythm of her breathing. Saturday was much the same, but louder. We rented a small boat from the hotel and spent the afternoon out on the water. The sun was high, the lake dotted with other boats, the air filled with the sound of distant laughter and splashes. Claire stretched out on the deck in her swimsuit, sunglasses catching the light, her skin warm from the sun. I took a few photos, not for me, not even for her, but because I knew photos have a way of finding their way into the right hands. We docked mid-afternoon and wandered into town, stopping at an ice cream shop where a group of tourists were clearly more interested in taking photos than eating. A woman in the group asked if we wanted one together. We didn't hesitate. Claire slipped her arm around my waist, leaned into me, and smiled like it was the easiest thing in the world. The woman snapped 3 shots, each one a little more intimate than the last. That evening, we dressed up for dinner at the nicest restaurant in the area. White tablecloths, candles on every table, a view of the lake through tall windows. Our waiter, clearly local, greeted Claire by complimenting her dress before he'd even handed us menus. She ordered another bottle of wine, and by the second glass we were laughing so hard that a table nearby turned to watch. Claire noticed and leaned in to kiss my cheek, her hand brushing the back of my neck. I caught the flash of a phone camera in the corner of my eye. We walked back to the hotel under the glow of the street lamps. Her arm looped through mine, her heels clicking on the sidewalk. Inside, the hallway was quiet except for the faint creak of the old wood floors. Claire unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned to me with a look that said the weekend had only just begun. Sunday morning broke with the soft light filtering through the gauzy curtains, casting pale gold across the bed. Claire was still asleep beside me, her hair tousled against the pillow, one hand resting lightly on my chest. Outside, the lake was calm, the surface mirroring the sky in a still sheet of blue. I slipped out of bed quietly and stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the crisp air. The quiet was broken only by the distant sound of oars dipping into the water from an early rower. By the time Claire stirred and joined me, the sun had climbed higher, catching in her eyes as she leaned on the railing. "Last day," she said softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Let's make it count." We dressed casually and headed into town, deciding on a late breakfast at a little cafe that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. It was busy, every table filled, but we didn't mind waiting. People's eyes followed us as we stood in the corner. Claire in a sundress, me in a simple button-down and jeans, both of us looking entirely at ease. When we were finally seated near the window, the view of the main street framed us perfectly for anyone passing by. We ordered pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee. At one point, a young couple at the table beside us struck up a conversation, asking if we were visiting from out of town. Claire answered with a smile, her hand finding mine on the table. "Just a weekend getaway," she said, and I could feel the warmth of her fingers anchoring the moment. After breakfast, we wandered back toward the lake. There was a small artisan market set up along the shore, stalls draped with colorful fabrics and strings of paper lanterns swaying in the breeze. Claire stopped at a jewelry stand, trying on a delicate silver bracelet, then holding out her wrist for me to fasten it. The vendor, a cheerful older woman, insisted on taking a picture of us for her shop's page, and we didn't hesitate. She angled the camera to catch the lake behind us, Claire's head resting lightly against my shoulder. We spent the afternoon walking the trails that looped around the water, finding small clearings where the sun filtered through the trees. At one spot, Claire pulled out her phone to snap a photo of the view, but ended up turning the camera on us instead. We stood there, the wind catching her hair, my arm around her, her smile brighter than I'd seen it all weekend. Later, back at the hotel, we decided to take the canoe out one last time. The water was glassy, the paddle strokes slow and steady. Claire sat at the bow, trailing her fingers in the water, occasionally glancing back at me with a knowing look. The sun began to dip lower, the sky shifting into shades of amber and violet. On the far shore, I spotted a group of people with cameras, maybe tourists or hobby photographers. Whether they were capturing the scenery or us, I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. We returned the canoe and walked back along the dock, our steps unhurried. At the hotel, we lingered in the lobby to grab coffee for the road. The receptionist smiled politely, but I caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She'd seen us come and go all weekend. Claire seemed to notice too. Her lips curved slightly as she turned toward the door. The drive back was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. We made one stop at a roadside fruit stand, buying a bag of fresh peaches that perfumed the car. Claire bit into one, juice dripping down her fingers, and laughed when I handed her a napkin. As we approached the edge of the city, the streets grew busier, the weekend retreat giving way to familiar concrete and traffic lights. Claire reached over and rested her hand on my arm. "Don't overthink tonight," she said. "Just be yourself." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. There was nothing left to rehearse. The weekend had unfolded exactly as it needed to, moments of quiet, moments of being seen, all woven together into something that would speak for itself without either of us having to push it. When we reached her neighborhood, she leaned over and kissed my cheek before stepping out, the red of her nails flashing as she closed the door. I watched her walk up the path to her door, shoulders straight, head high. Then I drove on, the city lights beginning to flicker on around me, each one bringing me closer to the inevitable. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the street. The house was dark, except for the warm glow from the living room lamp. I sat in the car for a moment, letting the quiet settle over me, then grabbed my bag and walked up the front steps. The familiar creak of the floorboards greeted me as I stepped inside. The air was still, the faint scent of Melissa's perfume lingering, though it was different now, tainted by what I knew. I set my bag by the door and made my way to the couch, sinking into the cushions as if I'd never left. My phone was in my hand before I realized it, and I opened Claire's social media page. The first post hit me like a deliberate strike. A photo from the market by the lake, her in the silver bracelet, me fastening it, both of us smiling under the dappled sunlight. The caption read, "Best weekend of my life." Below it were two more photos. One of us on the dock, her head on my shoulder, and another taken from the boat, our silhouettes against the sunset. The likes were climbing by the minute. Comments too, friends of hers leaving heart emojis, acquaintances writing "You two look amazing together." It wasn't just visible to her friends. It was public, which meant Melissa could see it. Ryan could see it. And judging by the timing of the posts, there was no chance they hadn't already. I was scrolling through the comments when I heard the door open. Melissa stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. She froze when she saw me sitting there, phone in hand, the light from the screen reflecting in my eyes. She was dressed simply, jeans, a blouse, but her hair was done, makeup still fresh. The kind of detail you notice when someone's been somewhere they cared to impress. "You're home early," she said, her voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I turned the phone so she could see the screen, the post filling it. Her gaze flicked to it, and for the briefest moment, her expression cracked. A tiny flinch before she pulled her features back into something neutral. But the color drained from her cheeks. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "What is this supposed to be?" I met her eyes, my tone even controlled. "It's what it looks like." Her lips parted like she was about to launch into an explanation, some half-baked story to make sense of it on her terms. But I didn't give her the space. I set the phone down on the coffee table, leaned back, and locked my gaze on hers. "Now we're even." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Melissa stood there, her bag still over her shoulder, as if she couldn't decide whether to stay or bolt. Her eyes darted back to the phone on the table, to the photos she couldn't unsee, to the undeniable evidence that the ground had shifted beneath her. I didn't move. I didn't offer comfort, didn't offer anger. Just the truth in those 3 words hanging between us. She seemed smaller now, the confidence she'd worn for months crumbling in real time. Finally, she turned toward the hallway without another word, her footsteps fading until a door clicked shut somewhere in the back of the house. I reached for my drink on the side table, took a slow sip, and let the quiet wrap around me again. The weekend hadn't erased what she'd done, but it had balanced the scales. She'd learned that betrayal doesn't just belong to the one who starts it. Sometimes it circles back in ways you don't see coming. If you've ever been in a situation where you took the power back on your own terms, I want to hear it. Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting for you.